fell off. It's that big, huge pinnacle there. That's the Grand Duras. The Petit Duras is just on the other side. This is where we walk down quite a lot to go skiing and climbing, and it's just... I love it here, and I don't know what the emotion is.
When you see a place where you saw your mortality, it's deep, it's elemental.
I think Steve is lucky to be alive. You don't fall 70 meters and live.
I think mountains can be magnetic, but the polarity can go both ways. I find that people after traumatic experiences in the mountains either go back immediately or they never go back again.
How do you quantify the desolation of your loved ones if you die? How do you quantify that? That's a very serious question.
I think you can justify it.
So my name's Steve. In 2012, one of my lungs collapsed due to stress at work. Sitting in that high dependency ward in central London, I had an epiphany. I decided to pack up my life in the city, a life where I was just too busy doing things I didn't want to do. I rented out my apartment, moved into my van, and just drove off to the mountains. A few months into this journey, I was magnetically drawn to Chamonix, a small town nestled in the clouds at the foot of Mont Blanc, the home of alpinism.
There's no other town that I've been to where the roads are named after these awesome climbers. It's such a cool thing in Chamonix how it's really part of the culture of everyone. You know, even the graffiti in town, even grandmothers and little kids know who Gaston Rubify is, you know, and that's pretty cool.
Meeting people like Bill, an aspirant mountain guide and helicopter pilot, that was one of the reasons I was drawn to Chamonix in the first place. It was the strength of characters I met straight away. Societal norms hadn't worked out for me, so I was rebelling against it all. And in Chamonix, the normal life pathways didn't seem to apply. It wasn't about getting to a certain age and behaving in a certain way. Instead, it was about living life to the full.
Oh my God, yeah. There are ski tracks going on here.
I think there's a real energy, there's a real strength that I personally feel when I come here. I think the mountain has an attraction that connects us all. There's obviously some kind of strength that's drawn from it. There are a lot of interesting characters in this town. There are a lot of lost characters, you know, who may not necessarily have found their place in society, but who came here and who found a place here because of the mountains.
Having only recently learnt to rock climb back in the UK, I now had this incredible historic range as my backdrop and inspiration. And I spent the next 2 years pretty much solely focused on developing my skills in the mountains.
That's great. It's a world shot for that.
Yeah, I totally am, man. Slightly emotional, a little bit emotional, but yeah. Turning my life upside down gave me incredible stories to tell. Every day seemed like a gift. However, these rewards eventually came at a heavy cost. In October 2014, 3 friends and I walked up for a day from the valley floor and camped underneath a mountain known as Le Petit Duras. The following morning, apart from the fact that it's tough being awake at 5 AM, everyone was on brilliant form. We started climbing an ice gully on the face, and having led the first pitch, I felt confident, maybe too confident.
The first thing, I didn't see the actual slip. I just heard Dan scream to me like, "Mike, take!" And I just started taking in rope.
All I could do was get my axes and I slammed them into the slope and put my head down and thought, this is it. I thought, it's gonna kill me. I wonder what it's going to be like.
So I'm spun round and I'm facing down the gully with my two ice axes like this, looking at my three climbing partners screaming.
And when that first piece of gear blew, I just waited for Steve to go past. Then I knew Mikey was going to get hit. I knew Mikey would maybe take the belay with him or something, and then I would wait then for Mike to finish, and then belay would go and I would go off. And then I'd go past Nick, and Nick would come with us, and we'd all four of us would go down the gully.
The brain doesn't really, it doesn't make sense for you to see this real person coming down towards you.
The brain maybe has some kind of way of shutting down the horrific following stages.
I just heard a huge crash of Steve sliding down and smack into the wall just ahead of me. The only reason he actually came to a halt was that one of his axes had looped in one of the ropes. Otherwise, he would have shot down a lot further past.
So that's my initial thought process, thinking, right, he's finished. How are we going to get him off, and how do we deal with the body? Because he was hanging upside down, and I thought there's no way that anyone can survive that.
And then after we stopped, everybody were like, okay, this actually happened. This actually happened. That's Steve down there.
So I just climbed up as quickly as possible to where Steve was and found him hanging upside down with his leg broken, pointing back towards me.
When we couldn't get a signal, I was like thinking, okay, how much work are we gonna have to do? Are we gonna have to abseil the whole face if we didn't get a signal? But since we did, that was a big comfort.
Donc nous, on avait comme élément, voilà, votre position dans la goulotte. On savait que vous étiez 4 dedans et que vous étiez sur un relais sur Python. On avait à peu près la hauteur de chute. Et puis, grosso modo, de quoi se plaignait Steven.
It's a good sound, that the helicopter coming through the valley. It's kind of what they say. They do look like angels.
Amazing, really relieving actually to just see them coming over the top.
Hearing that sound of the helicopter it's the only time I get slightly emotional about the whole thing, because those guys, they're legends.
Il y avait énormément de vent, donc un risque de chute de neige, de chute de glace au-dessus. Donc l'idée, c'était d'aller le chercher rapidement et une fois dans l'hélico, de s'occuper de lui plus correctement.
So one of the guys got lowered down on a winch and hopped over and attached himself to me and Steve, unclipped himself from the helicopter, and they flew off.
These kind eyes are suddenly with you, right next to in your terrible situation. There's a bloke there that's helping you out.
And then he just called on the radio, like, oh, I need a pickup, and the helicopter came with a cable and just flew them out. Went so fast.
And suddenly, I'm saying goodbye to my mates and thanking them. And I'm, what a ride. If there's one good thing out of that situation, that's crazy, flying above a glacier with massive mountains around you, hanging underneath a helicopter,
It was amazing and quite shocking as well, because all of a sudden we watched Steve spin off into the distance, and then we were left there, and as if it had never happened almost, just like sadly a bit of blood on the snow, and that was the only evidence of Steve ever being there.
I fell 70 metres down the face that day. That's the same height as the Notre Dame towers. I ripped my bicep off, destroyed my shoulder blade, and broke my leg in 3 places. I'm lucky to be alive.
He did almost die.
But he almost died, yeah.
I got the call from Anna, and the main thing I remember is that the list of injuries was so long, and it was from one bone to another bone, and blood from his ears and things like that, that I just wanted the list to end. And that is my overwhelming memory of that morning. Yeah.
I love you. The accident would turn out to be a pivotal moment in my life, with a lot of changes ahead. But at first, all I could do was sit and contemplate the events that unfolded during my long winter of rehab.
Well, two rock climbers are right now on the verge of making history in Yosemite National Park in California. Kevin Jorgensen, Tommy Caldwell are attempting to free climb the Dawn Wall of El Capitan.
The international press went into a frenzy over Tommy Caldwell and Kevin Jorgensen's groundbreaking ascent of the Dawn Wall in Yosemite. Tom Ballard, the son of late pioneering alpinist Alison Hargreaves, climbed all 6 of the great Alpine North Faces in one single winter. Ava Walkner won the Freeride World Tour, coming back after 2.5 long years of rehab following a major knee injury. Then there were all the other stories, the world over, people pushing themselves to their own personal limits. But the Alpine community also suffered some devastating losses. Much loved and inspirational personalities: Brendan O'Sullivan, Andreas Franzen, J.P. O'Clair, Dave Rosenbarger, and Liz Daly were all lost in the mountains. And living in a place like Chamonix, it can become all too easy for us to normalise tragedy.
The only thing that I think is really difficult here in Chamonix is that it's quite common that people pass away in the mountains. People can become blasé about it.
And it's also a bit surprising how fast we are going back to the mountains. I'm always thinking, but it's just 1 week. He died, and we are already playing again in the mountains.
So sometimes it's hard for us to say, oh, the guy is super intelligent, they was super mellow and super safely, and the mountain grabbed him.
There was no warning signs or no bad feeling. I always thought you'd maybe get some gut bad feeling when something was going to happen, and that really wasn't the case.
Come on, Brenny.
Just kind of happy and normal, and started to ski, and Brendan came down at the end, and he skied on the side of to the side of our tracks, and the snow sloughed off and left him on ice basically, and he started to slide and didn't stop. Fell a fair few hundred meters down the mountain.
You know, you hear about it all the time. You hear about people dying all the time, and you become desensitized to what it really means. It's like, death is dying. You're never going to talk to anyone again. You're never going to see anyone again. And it's really hard for people that are our age, my age, I'm only 31, but to really conceptualize what it means to never see someone again. And that was what really was difficult for me after Liz, like to wake up and wrap your head around the fact that the person's never coming back, whereas her stuff is sitting all around the room. It's impossible to understand. It's something that you don't have the skills to deal with at our age, and that's why we constantly put ourselves in situations where you may die, because we don't understand the ramifications of death.
Vous avez passé à côté de quelque chose de... Hein? Donc merci là-haut.
Il y a plein de gens qui disent ça.
Mais vous l'avez compris là? Là, le cœur il dit quoi là? Qu'est-ce qu'il dit?
Il dit c'est la plus fort.
Plus fort et plus sage, hein, parce que le cœur c'est ça, c'est la sagesse. C'est accepter d'être un être humain et savoir se poser. C'est pas aller dans l'excès, dans l'extrême. Il y a des choses, oui, mais à un moment, il faut dire j'arrête. Pour faire autrement,
Qu'est-ce que c'est mieux de vivre ennuyante, quoi?
Elle n'est jamais ennuyante. En tout cas, pour moi, elle est pas ennuyante, parce que j'ai trouvé ma place. Et vous la cherchez encore, votre place.
So in order to find my place, I realised I needed to ask myself some serious questions. It's a really key question. Why do I want to go out there? Why do I go out there in the first place? Why do I want to go out there again? And is it worth it?
think the psychological side of all of this is probably going to be much more intense than any of the physical restraints.
During the whole time of my injury, I wonder what is the point of this injury? What is it that I need to learn? And I kind of have a feeling that Steve might be questioning those things as well. And I'm really looking forward to talking with Steve in 3 years and see what his conclusions were.
I'll be honest and say that when Maria said that, I had absolutely no idea it was going to take me that long to process the accident. And while I felt strangely privileged to find myself temporarily in a wheelchair, because it gave me a unique insight into what it might be like, I also felt like I was being pulled away from the mountains. I'd totally lost my identity. I couldn't walk, run, climb, work, the things I usually hide behind. I couldn't do anything that made me, me.
I think it's totally fair to say there was massive post-traumatic stress. You know, he changed, his character changed at the beginning a lot. I didn't recognise him for a little bit.
When you're going through a hard moment in your life, you kind of feel like you're draining your surroundings of energy.
And it is very taxing on relationships when something happens like that. But it does show the type of person that you are when you do get injured and how you rehabilitate from that.
That's as far as you can go for now. That's good enough, okay?
And with my completely driven mentality during rehab, maybe I had let things become all too consuming, which eventually led to the breakdown of my relationship.
The darker times of that perhaps were the times when he questioned what he was doing and whether he should change it completely.
You start like looking at your life and your relationships and stuff like that. What is what, you know? And it becomes a huge thing to deal with when you have to sort out what is really important in my life.
With these situations, accidents like that, above all, what you learn is humility. You know, no matter what you were like before, you get a good dose of that, I tell you. Because you've just been squashed down to like kind of nothing. And you're thinking, the rest of your life, you know?
My initial feelings of guilt, shock,
Il y a eu un stress, moi, c'est sûr, avec tout ce qui s'est passé.
and even the crushing of my ego left me with a complete lack of direction.
You've got to have something else to do. Switch off from, okay, you can't climb for the moment. Put the energy into something else.
So as you can see, I picked up a camera, and with the help of some friends, I decided to take my questions to people like Andy Parkin, one of Chamonix's most colourful characters.
I get bored occasionally, I think it's about time I risk my life again, sort of thing, you know, because it's like that, you know.
As well as Steve House, whose books motivated me during my rehab. Nick Bullock, who had inspired me to start climbing at a lecture in London a few years earlier. And one of the world's most respected mountaineers. What a privilege it was to meet Sir Chris Bonington. So, despite having never filmed anything before or interviewed anyone, I set off in my van to meet these people that I looked up to. And with the effects of trauma so apparent in my life, the first question on the tip of my tongue was, why do we take risks? And is it an integral part of what we do?
I think that whether or not we need risk is one of the big unanswerable questions of climbing, of alpine climbing particularly.
Is risk an important part of what I do? I think probably, challenging myself, challenging personal boundaries is an important part of what I do. And I'm sure risk is a big part of that. Being scared, crossing boundaries, yeah, for sure. So, yeah, it will be, it is. Good, yeah. Yeah, it is. It's a massive part, actually, thinking about it. Because for me, climbing's psychological. In the mountains, it's a lot more, but rock climbing, the psychological aspects of rock climbing are a lot more important than the physical aspects for me.
I don't know if the risk for me is a fundamental part. I guess I think of it more as the adventure aspect. One of the reasons that I have focused so much of my life on climbing on El Cap is because it's big and it's sheer and it feels rad when you're up there, you know? It feels super exciting. but the rock is great. And the wall is so sheer that you can fall 200 feet and you're not gonna die, you know, you're not gonna hit anything on the way down. You feel that excitement, but you're not risking ending your life by doing that.
Well, I think in the human psyche, there is this this need to adventure, and it started off with just purely simply, of course, survival. You know, in earliest man, you had to adventure, you had to take risks to actually survive at all. And I think that's gone as a constant theme throughout the development of Homo sapiens, and it's still very much there. And I think one of the dangers from that point of view today is that there's an awful lot of people who are trying to close us down into a kind of risk-averse society. And I think mankind and society itself needs people who want to stretch the limits, who are prepared to take risks, whether it's business risks or whether it's climbing risks, personal risks, or what have you.
But in order to understand why I personally had taken these risks, I wanted to gain the professional viewpoint of Dr. Viviane Seigneur, who had spent many years researching the psychology of risk in the high mountains.
Pourquoi on prend des risques? La plupart du temps, on prend des risques parce que ça fait sens. C'est aussi simple que ça. Si on prend le risque de dire « je t'aime » à quelqu'un, à un moment donné, c'est parce que ça fait sens. C'est aussi simple que ça. De la même manière, pourquoi encore aujourd'hui, des gens peuvent monter à l'Everest sans oxygène en sachant qu'ils prennent un risque? Un risque, c'est pas un danger. Ils savent que ça peut échapper, mais ils savent que leur cerveau peut être impacté de manière durable. Et ils le font quand même, parce que ça n'aurait aucun sens pour eux de monter avec des bouteilles d'oxygène. C'est aussi simple que ça.
But did it still make sense to me, after everything that I'd put myself through, as well as those around me? Were my actions therefore ethically questionable? I decided to visit Mike McNamee, a professor of applied ethics within the field of sports science.
So lots of people say, you know, I want to do this activity in order to get this out of it. And it's a kind of means-end thing, right? How can you do that when you want to say to somebody, I want to stretch myself to the fullest, and the only way that I'm going to do that is to expose myself to certain kinds of risks, because to the majority of narratives of our lives, that's just a dumb activity. Think about what you want, think about it carefully, and think about the most strategic, economic, efficient, least risky way of getting it. But I suspect there are no non-risky ways of getting the kind of psychological goods and benefits that you get from adventurous activities. There are no non-risky ways of doing that.
Quels sont des avantages psychologiques de prendre des risques?
D'être plus fort que sa peur. Hein, ce que techniquement on appelle l'attitude contraphobique. Vous voyez comment, quand les petits-enfants, par exemple, on les jette en l'air comme ça et on les rattrape, et ils sont comme ça. Et en fait, ce qui les fait rire quand on les rattrape, c'est que, voilà, ils sont plus forts que leur peur.
On one hand, we'd love to all say, oh yeah, we don't need it. We can just make it 100% safe and we'll still get everything out of it. And objectively, that seems like it would be true, but it would not have the same effect. It's actually, to me, what differentiates climbing from almost every other sport. I doubt anybody ever was killed playing tennis. Not that tennis players aren't amazing athletes, but it's a completely different experience to play a game that has no risk and to do an activity like climbing that is dangerous. I've been, in my life, largely attracted to some of the most dangerous types of climbing, and always as kind of close to the edge of the limit as possible, like what's humanly, physically, mentally possible in a place of great risk. And the reason that I think I've continually gravitated towards that is because those experiences have illuminated parts of being a human, for lack of a better term, that I didn't know I was able to illuminate in any other way. I've become much closer, in a way, to myself. I learn a lot about myself in those situations that I just can't learn playing tennis. Sorry, it just doesn't happen.
And you don't have to climb hard. Demystify it a little bit. Why climbing specifically is so good is because we all experience the same thing at whatever level we climb at. And that's what you don't get, I don't think, in sport. And that's why, for me, climbing isn't a sport, because that person on that very easy rock climb will be still experiencing that psychology.
I feel so scared.
They'll be having the same doubts, the same fears, highs, lows as another person who is climbing E8.
No, don't be scared.
It'll be exactly the same. And what kind of other activities are there where you will experience, you know, I don't experience what David Beckham feels when he walks onto a football pitch, or did. I will never feel that.
When you're climbing really well, and you actually master those series of really committing moves with unpleasant consequences if you came off, there's a sense when you've done that, the most extraordinary euphoria, and it's more than exhilaration.
Those moments stick with you like nothing else, and they change you, and you learn more about yourself through those moments. But do you have to live those moments to be a full, happy person? I don't know the answer to that. As climbers, we like to say that, but maybe that's just an excuse to go out and do what we want.
To be honest, my current excuse was that the positives of climbing were masking my trauma and justifying my desire to go back. But did I find the psychological benefits of climbing addictive?
Can you give me the Oxford Dictionary definition of addiction? Because
an addiction is something that forces you into compulsive behaviour that's beyond your rational control.
Get you! That's brilliant. Have you just did you have that one ready for me?
No. I think that's pretty much what it is, right?
There's something there some connection that we can't explain. There's something, spiritual, something natural, that some raw energy that we get, that we need. It's like a drug, you know. And the more we do, the more we want. And then if we go away for a while, I need to go back in the mountains again.
If we're going to understand people's motivations and try to evaluate whether this is the kind of thing that society should support, I think we've got to understand why we value it. And to understand why we value these activities, we have to really understand them from the inside. What are they really about? What are we trying to achieve when we do this kind of thing? And I think if we can get a good description of those kind of intrinsic properties of what mountaineering is all about, you're not going to say something like, well, you're just like a hedonistic drug junkie. You know, you're just purely selfish, going out to get your own little bit of fleeting satisfaction for however many minutes or hours. No, that's just not fair, nor proper.
And then I walked down to the edge of the cliff. And I put my toes at the edge. And I look down and I assess the wind, the sun. I'm looking at every little variable that I need to be concerned about. And at this moment, I'm not really hearing anything else in the world. I'm completely focused on assessing this immediate situation that I'm about to get myself into. I'm completely in my zone. And I wait until I'm completely calm. And as soon as I'm ready, I take one big last breath. And then 3, 2, 1, see ya. There's nothing else in the world at that moment except for your flight.
Living like that, you know where you are, don't you? You know what I mean? You're right there at that point in time. It's not hovering around in a grey area, you know?
What way is it that this serious risk element transforms that immersion into the activity, which is just different from anything else, for you? Because the pro golfer or the windsurfer or the paraglider might give you very similar stories to being absolutely in the moment, focusing purely on the here and now, and that's a beautiful thing, right? But lots of people can do that in different kinds of ways. Think about a poet in the middle of a great line that they're trying to sculpt, or an artist who's drawing and redrawing the line of a nose or a lip. They'll get that kind of total immersion into the activity where the whole world falls away without risking their life. So what I'm grappling for is what adds to that kind of total experience when you say, oh, by the way, if you make a mistake, you're dead. And that's kind of a story I'd like to hear.
Allez, 3, 2, 1, parti!
I think that risk and fear, really, they show us that by staring death in the face, I mean, I know it's a trite comment, but it really shows us that we're not immortal, and then you can start to live.
And who better to talk about how to truly live than Paul Pritchard, one of the UK's leading climbers until he suffered a life-changing accident on the totem pole in 1998.
I was so close to death. You know, I lost half my blood on that ledge. There's plenty of people that say that their accidents kind of changed their life to such an extent that they've seen how to live now.
You want to pull up on this?
What, you not wash your feet, have you?
He was back climbing again with a renewed mindset and appreciation for life.
Well, I think that's the great thing about climbing is you've got to be very mindful.
Is that why you did it?
I think I didn't realise that at the time, but I think that is what has taught me how to live now and how to cope with this, what some would say was a ghastly accident, but what I say is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me.
The forced mindfulness, as well as the theme of challenging yourself, that's what struck a chord with me most. And perhaps that mindset had been helping me emotionally and physically as I went through rehab. Continuing in my search for positives and not really looking at the negatives, I travelled back to the UK with the goal of starting climbing again.
So the beginning of the summer's been amazing. Like, I'm back in the UK, away from the dark days of rehab, the monotone days of winter in the Alps, and my leg's not fixed properly. I tried to walk down to the doctors the other day and it was about all I could manage, but he has cleared me for work. But more importantly, I can cycle. Just getting speed again, being self-powered, it's rejuvenated me and started to sort out the chemical balance in my head. So I've also found out that I can climb. My leg's still gelling together and mending, so I can't take a whipper of a lead fall. I can only follow up as a second on the rope. You know, if I fall, I'm only going to bounce on the end of it. And so I've dragged Dan out, and that's just been amazing because he's just fronted up about 60 routes in the last month.
I've got you.
And I've just had the most relaxed climbing days out ever because I've just been able to build my fitness whilst really concentrating on my technique.
Where you start, where you always come back to, is just the pure, simple challenge of being on a stretch of rock which you know nothing about.
I'm not sure that's the way you made that move last year. Well done, man. Got a nice heavy belay here, so you're not going far. And that's in your own words.
I said you were a little, you know, round.
Said I was a little what? Round what? Barrel?
Filled out is the term you use.
I didn't say you were fat.
So you're just dependent entirely on the natural protection you can put in.
Well done, man.
Just.
And off you go.
Right, let's see how hard this is. How'd you get up here?
It gets hard and thin, and there's absolute concentration on climbing and getting up using the holes that are there and interpreting the rock as you go forward. It's like a game of chess because it's cerebral. It's actually
This is way hard.
working out what you're going to do.
That's good, isn't it?
And then doing it. So that is that physical kind of sheer satisfaction.
It's a very slow, very considered risk management activity, but it can also be just glorious fun.
Nice work, dude. That's such a great route, isn't it?
It is.
Did you have a nice time?
I did once I got to the top. Yeah.
Climbing again with Dan was brilliant fun and a refreshing reset. The film also saw change with a producer on board. Spending time with Menna and her 6-year-old Fion was starting to add a new dimension to my journey. We then got the whole crew back together, even the Swedish contingent that had never been to the UK before. And off we went to Plassebrennan Mountain Centre to meet Dave Evans, the guy that had taught me to climb only a few years earlier. This time it was to brush up on our rescue skills and hear his thoughts on my accident.
I mean, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? I think Steve grabbed the mountaineering thing probably in a way that was more drastic than I imagined he would do, being totally honest.
I was exactly the same. I threw myself at that. I went like running up things and like with axes and threw myself at it. And I've taken so many falls and so many because I just kept bouncing back and going back because I loved it. And I can see that in Steve.
You can go out in the hills and just really not think about how risky what you're doing is. You might have loads of enthusiasm and just go for it. And that's dangerous, you know, that's
Well, most people do that, you know.
Which means that when you do take that step, you know, that, for want of a kind of less dramatic phrase, but you take that step into the unknown, there's always going to be a point where you are in a vulnerable position where an awful lot of people get away with it, but some people don't get away without having, you know, an accident.
Yeah, I mean, it just sort of hammers home a bit exactly how much these guys did for me.
Did I want to be someone who just got away with it?
It will have changed. I think it would be silly not to change the approach to some climbing or the way you work in the mountains.
This was all a wake-up call. I had to accept that it was my own single-mindedness that had led to my accident. I needed to change that if my ultimate goal was still to reclimb the route that I'd fallen from. But first, I needed to start leading again.
As you come down the pass, your eye is drawn to this wonderful feature up on the hillside. It's just this amazing open book corner.
The walls are totally vertical, you know, featureless, amazing.
Pieces of rock and architecture like that do that to you. They make you want to kind of go and try and climb them and experience them.
You've definitely picked two very dramatic and iconic pieces of Welsh climbing history, I think.
If I questioned myself further, I also wondered whether my ego had played a part in my fall.
All right, mate. See you in a bit.
Yeah.
You know, I got bullied at school, got hung upside down on 3rd-storey you know, over the balcony by my ankles, got aerosol put in my sandwiches, got my leg broken. You know, I was pretty badly bullied at school and I had a lack of confidence because of that. Throughout my life, I've found other things that have given me confidence, and I think that that is a thing for me, that I do get confidence from doing things. Not people telling me, oh, you're brilliant, but just proving myself, because I think that I felt that I couldn't prove myself to these wankers at school.
Just got to get a wire in here.
At one time in my life, I felt I needed to prove myself to myself. I needed to prove myself to other people, to feel better about myself, to make other people, in my infinite wisdom, make me feel that other people would think better of me because I was a better climber. I don't know. I think there's a lot of that goes on in climbing.
Maybe before, that's why I was pushing dangerously as well, is that, you know, I was using it as fuel for my confidence.
Watch me here, Mike.
I pursue climbs these days that I have to become the person to climb them instead of climbs that I know I am already the person to climb them, and that means that I'm going to fail almost all the time.
Thanks, Mike.
I think I really had unanswered questions about myself. Like, was I a courageous person? Am I capable of bravery?
I've got a rest.
I'm not going to let what's happened to me stop me from going out.
My right foot.
I want to do everything I did before I fell and just show myself that I can do it again.
Were you nervous about climbing together all again, especially with Steve leading?
No, it felt really natural. It's just like going climbing like any other day when we've been climbing and will do in the future.
I'd like to second something next.
Yeah, but how was it having Mike hold your ropes again?
Obviously trust him. You know, like, he held a 70-metre fall. He's going to hold a couple of metres off this. No, that's a dark side to it, isn't it? This is bloody brilliant.
It's very nice. Great success.
It was good to have done it after all these years of looking up at it and wondering what it was like.
Wicked.
Good to see you on the rock.
The rope tied into two persons, it's something very special.
Think of it like this. If you meet a person, usually what you learn is basic biographical data, right?
I was an explosives technician. I used to work at sea, like making harbours deeper for bigger ships to come in.
All right. Just general stories you hear from somebody when you have a cup of coffee with them. Now, let's say go skiing. Already, I think anybody who's experienced those two things can agree with me that you feel a greater connection after a day of doing something physical out in the beautiful mountains with a person than you would if you spent the whole day drinking coffee. It's a different connection. Now take that same difference and multiply it by whatever multiplier you want, but 10, 100, 1,000. And for me, that's the more intense the experience that you share with the person, the greater the connection.
Je crois qu'il y a aussi autre chose qui est intéressant, c'est l'expérience de lâcher prise, de vraiment s'en remettre à quelqu'un d'autre, de vraiment faire confiance à quelqu'un d'autre, qui est une expérience, hein, c'est très engageant.
Going into places like Wenzhorn at Gogol, it's just it's everything. It's the atmosphere, the seagulls, the sea, the seals. You know, it's like being in a cathedral. It echoes, and you know, you don't get these experiences from walking onto a football pitch.
Look down between your legs, he says.
With climbing, it's really interesting. We don't have opponents like in other sort of what I would call individual sports. In a traditional sport, you're like working to beat somebody. Like you're training every day so that on the competition day, you can beat people and be faster or better than them. In climbing, you're doing all that same effort so that you can join up with somebody and do something that you wouldn't otherwise be capable of. And that's incredibly empowering, and I think it's incredibly positive. And the harder it is, the better the connection.
That was a real challenge. I really didn't want to do that when I left
down over there, but I guess that's what it's all about. Amazing. I'd like to go to a public house for a beer.
And then life had to move on, and we all went our separate ways for a while. Initially, I carried on my solitary life, essentially living for and by myself. But my relationship with Menna had become more than just professional. Hanging out with Fionn, who'd never met her own dad, which is something I would have run away from before as I didn't want kids. This was all starting to have a profound effect on me. I felt like I was going into a second phase of recovery. Now I was questioning my lifestyle choices.
I think when you're really into climbing, when you're into a period where you're deeply into climbing, it's so consuming. It takes over your life. It just does.
The things that we do, they're just for ourselves, you know, so it's a very selfish thing to do, to, you know, go and have all this enjoyment and have all this fulfillment, but really we take those risks, and although it's us that can die, it's the other people that suffer.
The one person who dies, it's one thing, but the people who stay, you just also, in some way, you also kill them by dying.
There's nothing heroic about going up and trying to kill yourself in the mountains. Sure, it's fun. The technical prowess required to do that is impressive. I find it totally impressive. It just gives nothing back. Like there's no synthesis. You don't build anything out of it.
Maybe you need to go through that selfish bit, because I was selfish as well, you know. You grow older, then you realise that it's not all about you. I learned that day in my 20s, and maybe some people might only get to learn it at 60, 70, whatever, you know.
There has to be a space in any life, doesn't there, for the satisfaction of one's own pleasures. There has to be a space. If the space in your life for that range of exciting significance that you're pursuing is all-consuming, it might just be a model of a good life for you.
So I've come back to exactly what I ran away from. I've come back to this swanky flat that I had when I was earning far too much money for my own good and stressing myself out to the max. I've come back here in order to sell this flat and move to Chamonix. And I'm just getting this huge slice of normal life because, you know, living in a van, doing what you want to do, climbing, skiing, whatever, is not normal because the whole country would fall apart if everyone went and did that, wouldn't it?
The economic question and the political question look something like, what spaces should a liberal society afford people who voluntarily accept risks that have serious economic consequences? Now, the point about those economic consequences is they aren't about you. You don't have to pay them. You may pay the price in injury and or, heaven forbid, in death. But somebody else is going to pick up the economic bill, and it's a bill that isn't going to be redirected to XYZ person's healthcare. And I think those are serious concerns of a social kind.
Really, we're just rich guys spending, you know, finding a way of enjoying ourselves. We need to stop being all high and mighty about it. What does annoy me is people on there saying, oh, I'm doing this for the bettering of, you know, mankind. We've got to push boundaries in unmapped parts of the world. And it's not about that. It's about you wanting to go out and play games.
I was being fulfilled in myself, but was I doing anything for anyone else? No. I wasn't doing anything for the world. I wasn't doing anything for anyone but me. I would post something on Facebook and people would type, oh, you're so inspiring. Why was I inspiring? I was just living for myself. I wasn't bringing up children or educating people in rebuilding countries that have been torn apart from tsunamis or negotiating between the military and the NGOs in Afghanistan to rebuild a war-torn country. You know, I wasn't. Why is that inspiring?
because I was living life to the full, but I was living life to the full for myself.
La société aujourd'hui valide et facilite cette démarche parce qu'on est dans une société de performance où il est de bon ton de repousser ses limites.
Some people ask me if I got it on GoPro. If you've been in a car accident, does someone ask you, hey mate, did you get it on GoPro? No.
We have been in this for a long time, in this era of like, I did this, look at me.
I hate it. You know, and I know that's a contradiction because I'm a part of it in a way.
On that 19-day climb, when it just blew up and went totally viral, it was quite strange for me. But on the other hand, the fact that all that media was there is the reason that I'm a professional climber right now. It's the reason that I can do this full time. So it's necessary in a way.
A lot of people, for whatever reason, in some of our society today, they're lacking something. And all of a sudden they can get 500 on Facebook. And you know, who am I to say, well, why shouldn't they? You know, what's wrong with that? But it's a bit sad, isn't it?
Yeah, you do have to be very careful in climbing that you don't do something because someone else wants you to do. It has to be, you want to do it for yourself.
The age of the selfie is actually the end of the age of the individual and the beginning, hopefully, of an age where people do the routes, they climb the mountains, but they do it more in the spirit of John Muir. They go there to, as he said, get their good tidings and to learn about themselves and spend time with their friends. And the records and the GoPros and the extreme selfies, there's so many of them, but they become essentially valueless.
It wasn't just my Facebook feed that had started to change. My #OneLifeLiveIt blinkers had started to come off, and the values that I'd begun to take on board were reshaping my life, possibly starting to ground me in ways that not even the psychological benefits of climbing could. I was still yet to find my place, but perhaps I was getting closer to what my nurse had been challenging me about.
How Steve has changed from hating children to loving them.
And now he's like, world's greatest dad.
I'm not going to go into this. I don't have to. A climber's van full of pom-poms, makeup, bags of child rubbish, marshmallows, Hello Kitty headphones for listening to your favourite. Which I'm well into now as well. Tiny little owl. He used to be like climber's chalk and fuel for the stove and dry shower. But now I've got pom-poms and Hello Kitty headphones. And a dad bod. The dad bod was growing on me, and so I'd made a decision to make some of these changes in my life more permanent. But before I could embark on this next part of my journey, I had one last hospital appointment to get through.
Mr. Wakefield! Mr. Wakefield!
Well, Mr. Kavanagh was amazing. He spent so much time going through every single detail of what's going on, what's happened. I've actually snapped one of the pins that's holding the major rod in, and that's because the bone is now taking the weight, and he's happy to just leave it in. My acromion is not unified, it's still snapped off. It's a bit of a strange injury, quite uncommon. But apparently to go in there and fix it, they would have to cut through the deltoid muscle and the other large muscles around there. Could cause me more damage, and ultimately I can do most things with it. So do I need to come back?
Well, not really.
He's super confident that I'll have no long-term repercussions from any of these injuries, which is crazy. I don't understand why I'm so fortunate and so privileged to be in that position.
So what's next?
So I guess I feel I'm in some kind of, it's not libido, is it? That's
Limbo.
limbo. I felt like I was in limbo. I couldn't move on yet. Seriously, I couldn't move on yet. I had sold the flat and I was moving to Chamonix. In fact, we were moving to Chamonix. But for me, despite the fact that I'd opened up my single-mindedness to allow for things other than the satisfaction of my own pleasures, I still hoped the real closure would come from going back and reclimbing that route. And so I was magnetically drawn back to Chamonix, but this time with a different mindset and very different circumstances. There were a lot of things to get used to. Well, I'm adjusting to being a dad. Then it's just making my head spin. So yeah, I've only had 4 hours sleep because Mena and I were chatting about being parents and how rubbish we are at it. The hardest thing that I found about bringing up Fionn, about being a dad, is giving over my time to someone else whenever they need it. And that's probably what most parents learn, you know. Essentially, I could never think of an unselfish reason to have a kid. But I think once you've got them, you have to be very unselfish. And ultimately, the most unselfish thing that I'd ever experienced was my dad taking me on as his own when I wasn't. And it was only now that I could really appreciate the gravity of that.
I would say Steve now seems more happy at his core than I have seen since I've known him, and I think that's come from several points. Ironically, I think the accident has given him, from the outside, has almost seems to have given him more purpose. And then, of course, there's the new additions to his life, which could not make me happier.
Okay, he's at the top, and I'm going to make him fall.
Do you think it would be super scary to jump off a mountain with one of those wingsuits on?
That'd be super scary for me.
But people still do it, don't they?
Yeah, I want to do it. I want to do it. Do it, guys. Do it, guys. Do it, guys.
Being a dad was hard, but ultimately I did love it. So even though I had been training to go back, could I still justify it?
That was full on. I've never been underneath a helicopter like that since my accident.
How do you quantify the desolation of your loved ones if you die? How do you quantify that? That's a very serious question. To give you a bit of thinking time.
Yeah.
To most people, the idea that I nearly lost my life, therefore I'm going to go back and put myself in the same situation sounds just bloody silly. So, a strong story is the kind of story you've got to tell yourself now, as well as those who you love, as to why you want to entertain those risks again.
I know you can justify it. No adventurer really has any justification for that. It's just that you want to do this thing so much you go on doing it.
I really try not to justify the risks I take by going in the mountains to my family. That's a hard conversation because, you know, I don't have any easy justification for it.
If I want kids, I think I would move. I would not stay in Chamonix because I think it's a dangerous place. Not only for the kids, but also because if we are still doing what we are doing now, it's possible something bad happen. I don't think it's great for a kid to lose one of his parents.
I think it's really important to have balance in your life so that the mountains aren't the only thing you have to excel in. And I think that's what's really dangerous in Chamonix is that so many people live here and that's all they have. maybe they don't have a relationship, they don't have family, they don't have anything else but to go up every day and do more and more dangerous stuff in the mountains. And so I think finding this balance about finding a passion or a project or something outside of this strict discipline of the physical domain of being in the mountains is really essential to staying safe in the mountains.
I never know if I'm making the right decisions. You know, there's times when I do climbs where I feel like I've gone beyond that edge of what I can responsibly do as a father. But I have to make those as few and far between as possible.
Now I think it's more about finding a balance. Like I get so much out of bringing up Fion. Like sometimes I don't. And I do think I should just run back to my other life, but that would be weak, wouldn't it?
It's totally different to be strong enough to just support yourself when you're sort of being selfish, which is what I did for a long time. But to also be there to be solid enough in yourself that others can lean on you is a whole nother thing, and it's actually kind of hard. and it actually makes me a lot better as a person, I think, and has taught me a lot about myself and taught me about where I can be stronger.
So while others were hitting the pistes, I continued to train. And although I was discovering that selfishly pursuing my own goals couldn't really be justified, I'd also learned that there was a lot more to it than that. And I still wondered if there was something else that was key to finding a balance. And although I still felt completely drawn back to the mountains, I realised that I could also answer questions about myself away from them.
Why can you be my dad?
On this journey of seeking answers from others, ultimately the decision as to whether to go back or not had to come from within me. I'm at the foot of the Le Chaux Glacier. I've just skied down here by myself, and the route, it's the first time I've been this close to it. The route's just up there. It looks really intimidating. Even the skiing up to it looks quite full on. Being here is overwhelming. Falling off that thing was such a pivotal moment in my life. You know, my life's changed so much since I fell off that. Being here right now is overwhelming. I just want to get out of here. I'll come back and have another look, but right now it's too much to take in looking at that. It's a real full circle thing, you know, you just thinking about everything that's happened over the last year and everything this film's about. Looking at that right now, I'm scared, and I want to get out of here.
When you see a place where you saw your mortality, it's deep, it's elemental.
Visually confronting that place that had caused me so much trauma, and yet still feeling that draw, that needed more processing. I was learning more about myself by taking on Fion than any climbing trip had ever taught me. I still wanted to find a balance. I therefore decided to step away from the busyness of life again and make another pilgrimage to the Petite Girasse.
You've got to go back if you want to. I think it's not just physical, it's your own mental approach. A climber knows that when they're ready for something, surely.
Each person's different, though, so what he feels about it, only he can know.
I feel like that would be a question that I would want to get answered, though, to find out what that was going to do to my psychology. I'm curious to see how that affects Steve.
It's just an experience, and it's up to you if you make it a good or a bad one.
It's healthy to want to go back and do it. We learn by our mistakes, don't we, by our experiences.
The good mountaineer will be a prudent mountaineer. They won't excessively picture their own capabilities.
I need to remember a lot of things about my fall, and the ground I moved into was particularly sketchy, and I moved into it on a very small amount of protection.
One rash judgment, and you can change that.
The accident has changed him in a really positive way in that he gives things a lot more thought than most. He doesn't take decisions lightly, and that's evident from him getting involved with me as a single mum. That's a lot for someone to take on, and it's not a decision that should or can be entered into lightly.
I think Daddy's going to find it really scary, but I'm okay with it.
As well as learning that life isn't just about me, and that pushing my own boundaries cannot be the ultimate goal, if I was to go back, I was learning that prudence and accepting my vulnerability were key.
If for you this was some kind of exorcism, I'm going to lay to bed the ghost of that horrible fall, that would be quite different to saying I'm going back to kind of prove to myself I'm a more mature, critical or reflective kind of person, and oh yeah, and I'm going to climb it properly this time.
Mike was right. I was going to climb it properly this time, prudently, and when the conditions were right.
I think it'd be a really good journey to go back there again.
When you have some unfinished business, you want to you want to finish it, and especially now when we got beaten up this badly.
I think that going back to the Petit Gras is going to be an important moment, because it's going to be one that's going to cause and evoke very strong memories, and it's also going to be one that is going to bring home everything that has been done since.
I was reborn on the totem pole because my life changed so much. I just felt that it was important. Climbing it was very important to close a loop. It's important for me, but I can't really say why.
I'm really glad you said that, because I don't really know why. It was true. It was the only question that remained unanswered. Initially, I had wanted to go back to rebuild my ego and prove to myself and others that I could climb it. But this journey had become so much more than that, and the balance I was finding in my life had diluted those feelings. I'm not a spiritual person, but the strongest thing I felt was a genuine magnetic draw to touch and physically connect with the place that had changed me so much. Perhaps I would only be able to answer why by finally confronting it.
So Steve, is it how you remember? Up there is where I fell under that roof, but there's a loads more snow on it and ice now. Yeah, it's one hell of a journey to get back here, isn't it? Yeah. Rock and roll. Yeah, I don't know what I'm thinking. Just gonna get on with it.
Climbing. Get into a nice rhythm.
Right. Cheers, guys.
Come for us.
De se confronter à ce qui nous a fait peur, ce qui nous a blessés, ce qui nous a profondément bouleversés, et j'ai l'impression que c'est le cas, que ça a changé énormément de choses, c'est de pouvoir reprendre aussi le contrôle plein de sa vie. Dans le sens où je veux pouvoir me confronter aux faits, au terrain, à mon passé, à mon expérience, et que je peux me confronter à ça pour totalement comprendre et vivre ce que j'ai à vivre.
So I'm leading the second pitch. we thought that the third pitch, the one I fell from, is still above us, but I've just got to the spot that I fell from. I'll turn the camera around and show you. Basically, it's up through there that I climbed. And I've got to get to the belay that's there. And the conditions through here were pretty shocking. So I've now somehow managed to find myself on the pitch that I fell from, looking at the spot that I fell from. Looking down the pitch that I fell from, screwed into an ice screw. This is what I fell down, straight down here to the guys below. Wow. I haven't been further than this point, and Mike's certainly never been here, has he?
I didn't get to climb more. None of us have climbed this high.
I mean, the condition, that's what I fell down.
That gives me the chills looking down, actually.
Really? How do you feel about being here?
Oh, it's just, yeah, looking down there and just imagining, you know, turning around and start sliding down this ice fall. Yeah, quite far down, quite far.
I'm not getting any flashbacks. Okay, so the last thing I saw was looking down there before I came round and you were right next to me sorting me out. So, but I'm not, I mean, I obviously just went black. It was too much for me, or I hit my head, or I blocked it out or something. But like looking down there, that is exactly, now Mike's, thanks for reminding me, mate. That's exactly the last thing I saw. And then I woke up at the bottom with a broken leg, a ripped bicep, and a smashed shoulder, and a massively bruised ego. Right, let's get past it.
Okay.
Nice one.
What's been tested is your devotion to the ideal, and you come up. Well, it still means something to me. I still want to do that, you know. It actually means of expression, after all. You're a proven climber, you know.
Steve being Steve, though, I always assume that he will carry on. He's always picked himself up and carried on.
In some ways, there might be extra risk because of the psychological thought that this is where it happened once. So it might be a little bit unnerving for him.
How's it going, Steve?
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, there was for me. There's a psych out climbing it.
There's a lot going on. Come on!
Just keep it steady.
You know, there's a line by T.S. Eliot, and he says something like, and the end of all our explorations will be to arrive at where we began the first time.
Keep it up.
And see it afresh, or see it for the first time.
Yeah.
What's changed is you, not the mountain or the task ahead of you. And it sounds like you've been on that kind of critical journey, that you're going to go back to where it all started, and what's changed is you.
He's only gone and done it.
Safe, Mike!
Yeah, man, nice one.
Men from Steve, hello.
Yes, I've just sent the pitch that nearly killed me. I'm at the belay at the top.
Amazing, baby. How are you feeling?
Amazing back. I've got to go and sort myself out. Over and out. I'm safe. I love you too. I had my friends Nick, Mike and Dan to thank for so much. But there was little time for emotion whilst hanging from that face. We were enveloped in the now with safety consuming our headspace. We climbed one more pitch. The faff of filming had taken up so much time and the weather was closing in and Mike was cold from belaying so much. It might not be the summit, but that's not what this was all about. We're off. If prudence is key, then now wasn't the time to push for the summit. The goal of reaching the top would only have been a short-lived pleasure anyway, giving way to a feeling of searching for the next one. The most profound thing about going back wasn't about climbing it after all. It was what had got me there. You're amazing. My journey of trying to find answers to all these questions hadn't reached its final conclusion on that route. I was actually finding more answers in everyday life. People used to say to me, "Oh, you must be so happy to be alive. Nothing must bother you or matter after you had that scrape with death." But whilst I was always striving towards the next self-imposed goal, I can't say that I was truly happy. I've realised that meaning, purpose and value can be found by being a present parent, a compassionate son, or a dedicated friend, in doing something admirably, and not by being all consumed in the pursuit of your own personal pleasures, but by giving something back.
When I thought I was going to die, I thought, you know, that was something that was missing. I wish I had done more for other people. I wish I'd done more specifically for my climbing community.
And I've even got this job now where I go into schools and talk to the kids about disability, but also about kind of you know, motivating them. So what I've learned from the totem pole, and what I've gained from the totem pole, I'm now passing on, and it seems to be my duty almost.
The mission of Alpine Mentors is to, in a sense, it's twofold. In one, it's to create mentors, and in another, it's to help educate young climbers and help them live through their developing years, especially as alpinists.
And then doing that, get a kind of like an intense experience as you do, you know, winter soloing in the Himalaya. And then I'll go and teach the kids, these deaf children I do for, you know, Community Action Nepal.
This is like my crescendo, with support, kind of all people, disabled or not, are capable of extraordinary things. And that's what I say.
Because it is extraordinary.
Comment, après un accident, on va reprendre une forme? Comment on va aller au-delà de l'épreuve? Et je crois que beaucoup d'alpinistes sont inspirants sur leur capacité à transformer une expérience ultra négative. Enfin, j'imagine que vous n'avez pris aucun plaisir à vous casser la jambe sur 3 endroits et à voir la mort de très près. Mais comment vous êtes en train de transformer ça en énergie créatrice? Comment la douleur, peut-être même la tristesse, comment peut-être les regrets peuvent amener au fond un documentaire inspiré, profond, riche, intelligent, beau, Comment on arrive à transformer quelque chose d'aussi difficile et douloureux en une belle chose.
When we return to our original case study of you taking those risks, was it the case that maybe it was all too consuming? Maybe you'd lost a sense of perspective? In everyday language, people say you can't put an old head on young shoulders, but I think Kierkegaard had it better when he said, you know, life can only be understood backwards. The trouble is you have to live it forwards. And I think understanding the shape of a meaningful life for you is something that isn't going to come to you in your teens or your 20s or your 30s or your 40s. The trouble is you've got to do your best in those years, whilst not precluding all your possibility for full and meaningful lives afterwards by the recklessness of the here and now.
Still, the last sad memory hovers round and sometimes drifts across like floating mist, cutting off sunshine and chilling the remembrance of happier times. There have been joys too great to be described in words, and there have been griefs upon which I've not dared to dwell. And with these in mind, I say, climb if you will, but remember that courage and strength are naught without prudence, and that a momentary negligence may destroy the happiness of a lifetime. Do nothing in haste. Look well to each step, and from the beginning,
Is he okay?
think what may be the end.
They don't quote me on this, but I'm on camera.
Do you mind? Yeah, you just play around with this, so I don't sound like so much of a heartless bastard. I would like to point out that I was concerned that Steve had fallen. It wasn't as if I was like, oh fuck, it's another piece of meat hanging off the edge of the road.
Obviously, you've met Steve.
Yeah, wanker. I can't hear so well when I'm sitting up in this position, but if I talk like some kind of demented flamingo like this, I can actually hear really, really well.
When we planned moving to Chamonix, it was a dream come true. What are you doing to me? I got in serious mode then and you ruined it.
Steve's certainly a complete. Why you want to go back up there again?
Seriously, how do you feel about Steve?
Referring to himself in the third person.
Because it does sound as if you could be making another film about how your other lung collapsed in Chamonix and you decided to move somewhere peaceful and quiet and work 9 to 5 like London or something. I think you just do need to be careful.
I think, like Steve, I've been so focused on the logistics.
Although it would be nice to get my face on the TV, but all the ladies. I'm single, by the way. I have a van, and I currently earn $22,000 after tax.
It's more than I earn.
Yeah. I should say I've got a double bed. It's memory foam. Yeah. And all my own teeth.
That's going in the outtakes.